But now let's go to Matt Goodwin in London, professor and academic. Matt, great to have you back with us as always. Matt, you've had these riots in Leeds, which have been just horrific. The footage that we've seen, police cars being torched, things overturned. Tell us what's going on. There seems to be a lot of confusion. No one seems to be quite clear who is behind these riots, why they took place, etc., etc. Maybe you can fill us in on that. Your friend and our friend Nigel Farage got in a little bit of trouble for drawing conclusions as to who was behind it. Fill us in on the picture, please, Matt, and lighten outsiders as only you can.
Well, firstly, it's great to be with you again. Yeah, what we have seen this week, really troubling scenes, actually, from a very diverse community in the northern city of Leeds, a large immigrant population, essentially turning over police cars, harassing police officers, setting fire to buses. The disturbances essentially began when social services went in to essentially explore a child welfare issue in a family, a Romanian family, and what then followed were those significant disturbances as people within that community felt that they were being unfairly targeted by the authorities. But of course, to many people here in Britain, something that Nigel Farage alluded to is, I think this is yet more evidence of how in very multicultural, diverse communities, you have a complete breakdown of respect for authority, respect for our ways of life, respect for the rule of law, and some really shocking scenes coming only a week or so after a general election, which actually saw a lot of voters mobilizing along ethnic, religious and racial lines. We saw for example, lots of pro-Gaza candidates doing quite well in areas of the country. And this is sort of adding to that narrative. This is why Nigel Farage said, look, I've been warning about community tensions like this for many years. He was widely criticized, but I personally think he was right to raise the issue, to say we have a problem with segregation in this country. We have highly segregated communities that are not adhering to the rule of law. And that essentially is what you can see playing out on your television screens.
Matt,
Rita.
We are continuously told diversity is our strength. We have demonised assimilation, and I think you can be a very successful society with migrant communities from all backgrounds, but at its heart, you must have shared values. You must insist on assimilation. If you come to Britain and you don't respect those values, you're going to get more of this, aren't you?
I mean, I'd go even further than that. I think it's impossible to even have a strategy for integration and assimilation while we're running the kind of immigration levels that we're running currently. Yeah. Viewers may not have noticed, but this week we also had some shocking figures relating to Britain's population. We're currently going through the biggest increase in our population since 1948, when the squaddies returned home from World War II and we had a baby boom in the late 1940s. Now, of course, that was involving lots of British people having babies. The reason our population is expanding today at the fastest rate for 75 years is primarily because of mass immigration. We have a net migration level now at over 600,000 people, meaning 600,000 more people are coming into the country every year than are leaving. And most of those people are coming from outside of Europe. They're coming from Nigeria, India, Pakistan, more culturally, religiously diverse countries. And this is generating a lot of alarm in the country, because it's not even about uniting people around a sense of, Western values, or never mind British values. It's generating alarm among people who are saying, well, how on earth are we going to actually unify and integrate these incredibly different communities who have very different ways of life, and that's why voters are becoming quite alarmed.
Well, so we've seen here a community apparently taking up, rioting against the British authorities. But if you create the situation where everybody is doing their own thing and bringing their own tensions and passions from overseas without ever being taught, here's what it means to be British, and these are the things that we do here, and these are our common values, and you subscribe to it, how long then do you start to get before these communities start going to war with one another if they've brought those tensions from overseas?
Well, I think we already can see that in parts of London where we have youth gangs organised along ethnic and racial lines who are competing over the drugs trade. And if you were to go to Sweden, for example, not too far from here, it's a 2-hour flight to Stockholm. Well, the Swedes, let me tell you, they've quickly given up on mass immigration. They used to be famously liberal, famously tolerant. Now everyone in Sweden is saying that experiment has been a complete disaster because they've seen a very similar eruption in gang violence, in criminality, and in open abuse and harassment of people in the emergency services and authorities. I would mind less about this if it wasn't being accompanied. Well, I would always be concerned about this, but what alarms me today more than even the level of immigration into Britain is the narrative that is simultaneously being pushed by our elite class, which is basically saying we must celebrate every minority community and its distinctive identity, while simultaneously being very negative about those British values, our British history, our sense of collective memory, that there is something fundamentally wrong in their eyes about celebrating the majority identity. And this is really the model of multiculturalism that the elites embrace. It's what a colleague of mine, Professor Eric Kaufman, has called asymmetrical multiculturalism. You should celebrate minorities, but you should denigrate the majority. And that is why I think many people are feeling especially anxious, because they can't talk about those unifying British values, because they're told over and over again that there is something wrong with being British. There is something wrong about our identity and our history. And I think lots of voters have had enough of that, which is why people like Nigel Farage are doing so well at our general elections.
Well, and Matt, just about that, I remember during the Blair government, one of your ministers talked about how, they wanted to import people from overseas to rub Britain's face in multiculturalism. Where does this kind of almost religious attachment to this sort of program come from? Because it seems like around the world, they say, oh, the far right's winning. It's because people are concerned about immigration. Well, why don't these parties just give the people what they want and do something about immigration?
I think it's a really interesting question. If you look across Europe, if you look at the latest polling in America with Trump, we can see very clearly also why Nigel Farage did well here at the election 2 weeks ago. We can see that the number one reason is this desire to lower migration and slow the pace of change. But as John McWhorter, an academic in the US, has argued, for the elite, for the new elite, celebrating diversity has become a new religion. I mean, he calls it the new religion for the elite class. And if you are critical of this religion, you are considered to be blasphemous. If you challenge the new orthodoxy, you are to be silenced, you are to be cancelled, you are to be considered an outsider. I'm in the universities, let me tell you, saying the sorts of things that I say through my research and my writing comes with enormous consequences in terms of career and social networks and so on. It's not easy for people to put their heads above the parapet and say, you know what, it's not that I disagree with this. I mean, personally, I do. It's also that the evidence just isn't really supporting this. The kind of migration that we now have in Europe is very low wage, low skill migration, mainly from places like Africa, from the Middle East. It is not boosting our economies, and it's undermining social cohesion. We know the evidence is there to show this. People like Robert Putnam at Harvard, a very famous academic, has shown that in highly diverse societies, you get lower levels of trust and you get lower levels of support for welfare, because people don't want to contribute into the collective pot because they don't really know who they're living next to. They don't have those shared values. They don't have that shared sense of identity. And I think this is where the narrative that is being pushed by the elite over and over again is beginning to break down, because the real world episodes that, again, we've seen with the rioting, but we've also seen with the Islamist attacks across Europe, we've seen with the large-scale rape and sexual harassment of young women, mainly white European women, from one city to another. The real-world examples of what's happening are blowing that narrative apart, and voters are now beginning to sense that.
Matt Goodwin, as Donald Trump would say, embrace being an outsider. We certainly do on this show. Matt, great to chat to you as always.
Great
and we'll chat to you in a few weeks' time.